Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I had always been healthy, but the first sign that something was wrong came when I started experiencing strange numbness in my legs. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just from sitting too long at my desk. But then the headaches started. Not your regular headaches, but the kind that made me see stars. After 3 months of increasingly concerning symptoms, I finally went to my doctor. One MRI led to another, and suddenly, I was being admitted to the hospital for extensive testing. The scan showed multiple lesions on my brain and spine. The doctors suspected an autoimmune condition, but they needed more tests to be sure. I remember sitting in my hospital bed that first night, scrolling through medical websites on my phone until the nurse gently suggested I try to get some sleep instead. I was handling it as well as anyone could, I suppose. On the outside, I looked perfectly normal. Still dressed in my usual casual clothes, still able to walk and talk normally. The only visible sign that something might be wrong was my glasses, which I'd worn for years, due to nearsightedness. My co-workers had been supportive when I told them about the tests, but I could see the confusion in their eyes. How could someone who looked so normal be potentially seriously ill? As part of the testing process, they sent me to the ophthalmology department to check my optic nerve. The hospital corridors were a maze, and I had to ask for directions twice before finding the right department. When I arrived, there were 2 doctors in the room, an older one in the back writing notes and doing paperwork, and a younger one who would be examining me. The room smelled strongly of disinfectant and had that distinct medical feel, with its white walls and gleaming equipment. The young doctor asked me to take a seat and inquired about the reason for my glasses. I responded casually, saying it was just nearsightedness. I probably shouldn't have used the word just. I was already nervous about all the testing, and this was just one more appointment in what felt like an endless series of medical visits. That's when everything went sideways. The young doctor's face changed completely, like I had just insulted her entire profession. She launched into a heated speech about how there was no such thing as just nearsightedness, insisting it was a serious condition that could lead to severe complications. Her voice grew increasingly passionate, and I could tell this was something she felt strongly about. For the next 10 minutes, yes, 10 whole minutes, she lectured me about the dangers of nearsightedness. She went on and on about retinal detachment, glaucoma, and how I needed to take my condition more seriously. I sat there politely, thinking she must have read my file and was incorporating this into the bigger picture of my condition. My hands were starting to sweat, and I kept looking at the older doctor in the back, wondering if he was going to intervene. She was in the middle of explaining how I could lose my vision entirely when she finally paused to look at my medical file. The room went silent as she read about the brain lesions, the spine lesions, and the real reason I was there, to check my optic nerve for signs of neurological damage. The only sound was the gentle hum of the equipment and the ticking of the wall clock. I watched as all the color drained from her face. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. The older doctor in the back had stopped shuffling papers and was watching the scene unfold. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Her voice completely changed when she finally spoke again. Gone was the lecturing tone, replaced by quiet, professional, almost apologetic instructions to put my chin on the rest and look straight ahead. She continued with simple directions. Look up, look down, follow the light, all delivered in near silence. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the equipment. The older doctor eventually came over to double-check some findings, giving me a sympathetic look. I could tell he was trying to smooth over the awkward situation with his calm demeanor and gentle movements. When I left the office, I heard the older doctor clear his throat, followed by the young doctor's embarrassed mumbling in response. I felt a tiny bit of satisfaction. I sat in my car for a few minutes afterward, processing what had just happened, torn between amusement and exhaustion. The young doctor had probably seen hundreds of patients with nearsightedness, and maybe she was trying to be thorough. But that day, she learned an important lesson about making assumptions and jumping to conclusions before reviewing a patient's full medical history. I wondered how many other patients she had lectured similarly and whether this experience would change her approach. Later that week, when I returned to the hospital for more tests, I saw her in the hallway. She quickly turned and walked the other way, nearly bumping into a nurse in her haste to avoid me. Now she had started making it a point to read patient files thoroughly before beginning any examination. The nurse even mentioned that the young doctor had brought up the incident during a staff meeting, using it as an example of why proper preparation was crucial. I've been having a rough month. My cat of 12 years passed away recently, and I've been trying to cope with the loss by throwing myself into work. I'm a veterinary technician, and helping other animals somehow helps me deal with my grief. Today was quite difficult. We had to put down an elderly cat that reminded me so much of mine. After my shift ended, I decided to stop by the local bakery. They make these amazing New York-style cheesecakes that always lifted my spirits. As I walked in, I overheard one of the staff mention they only had one slice left for the day. Perfect timing. I quickly made my way to the display case, and there it was, the last slice, looking absolutely divine. As I was paying for it, I heard someone clear their throat aggressively behind me. She rudely exclaimed that she was going to buy that slice. I apologized but explained that I had just paid for it. She demanded that I unpay for it, claiming she needed that cheesecake and that she'd been coming there every Tuesday for the past 3 years, suggesting the slice was practically hers by default. I explained again that it doesn't work that way since I'd already purchased it. She then went on about how her daughter got straight A's this semester, and she had promised her this specific cheesecake as a reward. She accused me of ruining her daughter's achievement. The staff behind the counter tried to help by telling her they'd have fresh cheesecakes tomorrow morning. She angrily refused, demanding to have it right then and there. I took my purchase and started walking toward the exit. That's when things got weird. She followed me, yelling about how selfish I was and how I was teaching children that being greedy is okay. I quickened my pace to my car, but she kept following. As I tried to leave, she shouted that I couldn't just walk away and that she wasn't done talking to me. I reached my car and quickly got in, placing the cheesecake on the passenger seat. She stood right behind my car, preventing me from backing out. After a minute of this standoff, I called the non-emergency police line to report harassment. That's when she completely lost it. She walked to the side of my car and, to everyone's horror in the parking lot, started deliberately banging her head against my driver's side window. Not just once, multiple times. She started screaming for help, claiming I was attacking her and trying to kill her, begging someone to call the police. By this point, a small crowd had gathered, phones out, recording everything. Blood was trickling down her face from where she'd hit her head, and she was swaying slightly. She kept yelling at the crowd, insisting they had all witnessed me attacking her and pleading with them to call 911. Several people did call emergency services, but not for the reason she wanted. I could hear them clearly describing how she had followed me and injured herself. Within minutes, police and an ambulance arrived. She immediately launched into a dramatic performance, telling the officers she was grateful they arrived and demanding they arrest me for assault, pointing at all the blood as evidence. That's when I mentioned I had the entire incident recorded on my dash cam. Her face went pale. She clearly hadn't noticed the camera. The police reviewed the footage right there, and things got even better when several witnesses came forward with their phone recordings. The paramedics tried to examine her head, but she kept pushing them away, suddenly insisting she was fine. But it was too late. She had already claimed assault and injury, so they had to do a proper examination. The police arrested her for harassment, filing a false police report, and damaging my car. She had actually dented the door panel with her head. One of the witnesses turned out to be a manager from her workplace. Apparently, she was supposed to be at work during all of this, having called in sick that day. The manager was just picking up some pastries for the office when they witnessed the whole scene. 2 weeks later, I received notice that she was being charged with multiple offenses, lost her job, and had to pay for the damages to my car. The bakery also banned her permanently and now saves me a slice of cheesecake every Tuesday. Though I never asked them to do that. They just thought it was the least they could do after what happened. I'm a single mom to my beautiful 2-year-old daughter, who was diagnosed with autism last year. After my husband passed away from cancer, I had to switch jobs to something that would give me more time with my little one. I found this perfect position at a logistics company that allowed me to work from home 3 days a week. The only challenge was finding proper childcare for my daughter. After months of searching, I finally found this place called Family Building Blocks that claimed to specialize in caring for children with special needs. They had great reviews, offered transportation, and seemed to have experienced staff. It felt like a miracle. For the first 2 months, everything went smoothly. The bus would pick up my daughter at 8 a.m. and she'd return home at 2 p.m. The driver and attendants seemed caring and professional. But yesterday changed everything. It was a cold morning around 36 degrees. I bundled up my daughter in her favorite pink coat, gave her the usual goodbye hug, and watched as she boarded the bus with 7 other children. There were 4 staff members present, 2 attendants, the driver, and what appeared to be a supervisor. As I watched her board the bus, I called out my usual goodbye, telling her I loved her and to have a great day. She waved back at me through the window. Little did I know that would be the start of a nightmare. At 11:30 a.m., I received a call that made my blood run cold. The driver called to tell me there had been an incident. When I asked if my daughter was okay, they hesitantly explained that they had just found her on the bus. I couldn't understand what they meant by found her and asked where she was supposed to be. That's when they admitted she had been left strapped in her seat when they unloaded the other children that morning. My heart stopped. 3 hours. My baby had been left alone on a cold bus for 3 hours. When they started talking about conducting an internal investigation, I cut them off and told them I was calling the police. I rushed to the center, breaking every speed limit on the way. When I arrived, I found my daughter confused, hungry, and sitting in an unchanged diaper. She was shivering despite being wrapped in a blanket that one of the staff members had given her. The center's director tried to handle the situation by expressing regret and mentioning they were reviewing their protocols. I pointed out that they had 4 adults responsible for only 8 children, demanding to know how they could possibly miss a child. The director tried to defend themselves by suggesting these things can happen, but I told them that no, these things don't just happen, and that this was criminal negligence. I immediately called the police and filed a report. Then I contacted a lawyer who specialized in cases involving children with special needs. Turns out I wasn't the first parent to have issues with this center, just the first one with such a serious incident. The investigation revealed that not only had they failed to do the required bus check, but they had also falsified the morning attendance records to show my daughter was present in class. The driver and attendants were fired, the center's license was suspended pending a full investigation, and my lawyer is building a case that will ensure this never happens to another child. I found out through a former employee that the center had been cutting corners on their safety protocols for months, and my incident finally exposed them. They're now facing multiple investigations from different agencies, and other parents are coming forward with their own stories. My daughter is now at a new center, one that actually follows proper safety protocols and truly cares for children with special needs. I'm making it my mission to push for stricter regulations and better oversight of special needs childcare facilities. I was diagnosed as autistic when I was 6 years old, though my mother never believed me when I said I was sick or in pain. She had this twisted logic that because I was autistic, I was hypersensitive to discomfort and would exaggerate everything. The reality was actually the opposite. I had a higher pain tolerance than most people. When I was 12, she let me suffer through walking pneumonia for over a month before I finally saw a doctor. That was just one instance of many where she dismissed my health concerns. I couldn't take it anymore, so I ran away from home when I was 15. I spent the next few years having little to no contact with my parents. At 18, I moved back to a town near my hometown. I thought maybe enough time had passed that I could try rebuilding a relationship with my mother. I was living alone in a small apartment, still figuring out how to be an adult. One night I experienced the most severe stomach pain I'd ever felt. I was vomiting and couldn't even stand straight. Initially, I dismissed it as just an upset stomach from eating too close to bedtime, which happened to me sometimes. But throughout the night, the pain got worse, and I developed a fever. I knew something was seriously wrong, but I'd never called emergency services before, and I was new to the area. I was scared I might be overreacting, so instead of calling an ambulance, I decided to call my mother on the landline. I could barely walk to the phone, screaming in pain with each step. When she answered, I struggled to tell her, through the pain, that something was seriously wrong and I needed help. She responded with skepticism, asking what was wrong this time in an exasperated tone. I tried to explain about my stomach, but the pain was so intense I could barely speak. I managed to hear her say she was coming before I passed out mid-conversation. Thankfully, my downstairs neighbors must have heard either my screams or the sound of me crashing into the kitchen table. They called an ambulance, which arrived just before my mother did. As the paramedics were assessing me on the floor, my mother burst in, looking annoyed at the ambulance's presence. She immediately started telling the paramedics that they didn't need to be there. She explained that I was autistic and had a habit of exaggerating my pain for attention. She insisted that I frequently faked health problems. The paramedics looked uncertain, looking between me and my mother. One of them asked if I really thought I needed to go to the hospital. Despite my mother's interference, I managed to insist that something was really wrong and I needed medical attention. At the hospital, everything changed when my blood work came back. The medical staff rushed me for an immediate CT scan. The doctor explained that my appendix hadn't just been inflamed, it had completely ruptured. The sudden relief from pain I'd felt when passing out was actually the rupture happening. I needed emergency surgery, and I was at high risk for sepsis. The doctor explained to us that if I hadn't come to the hospital when I did, the situation could have been fatal. He emphasized that sepsis from a ruptured appendix was extremely serious. My mother stood there, her face growing paler with each word. My mother started crying, finally realizing that if she'd had her way, if my neighbors hadn't called that ambulance, I might have died. The surgery had to be done with an open incision instead of laparoscopically, and I spent several days recovering in the hospital. After that incident, my mother's attitude changed dramatically. Almost too dramatically. She became hyper-vigilant about my health, calling constantly to check on me if she heard I had so much as a cold. During my hospital stay, I overheard her talking to one of the nurses. She was sobbing, confessing how she'd almost lost her daughter because she wouldn't listen. The nurse tried to comfort her, saying that sometimes we have to learn lessons the hard way, and the important thing was that she was learning them. My mother's response was heartbreaking. She couldn't stop thinking about all the times she hadn't believed me, questioning what kind of mother doesn't believe their own child. Our relationship is still strained, but that incident was a turning point. She finally had to face the consequences of her dismissive behavior, and it scared her straight. These days, she not only takes my health concerns seriously, but also my other needs and boundaries. It took nearly losing me for her to realize that being autistic doesn't make my pain any less real. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.